Hey everybody, so we're going to be talking about how World War II begins in Europe and then ultimately how the United States gets involved in our immediate home front response to the war effort. And this whole lecture is going to have a bunch of cartoons that are created by Dr. Seuss. That's right, you heard me, Dr. Seuss, the guy who creates children's books and writes, two fish, red fish, blue fish, whatever. He actually feels a very strong way about World War II and the actions that are happening over in Europe and the U.S.'s lack of involvement. And so he creates a whole series of political cartoons. And then after we get involved, they continue to talk about the war effort. So I included a lot of these political cartoons because I feel like they do a really nice job showing all the different views going, before the war, then into the war. This one I feel like is really powerful. So it says, "And the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones, but those were foreign children, and it didn't really matter." So her sweater says "America First," which will come up later when we talk about our lack of involvement in the war effort. And you see it says Adolf Hitler, or say Adolf the Wolf. Okay. So fascism and the rise of fascism. Okay, so in Europe, we're going to see the rise of totalitarianism and fascism. I can do it. Fascist governments. So totalitarianism is a form of government in which a power resides in one singular leader who rules according to their own self-interest without regard to individual rights and liberties. So doing what they want. A fascist system, then, is a system of government that is characterized by strict social and economic control and strong centralized government, usually headed by a dictator. The first fascist government that's going to rise up is going to be in Italy. Soon to follow, though, will be in Germany. In Germany with Adolf Hitler. So in Italy, what is Mussolini's first name? Roberto Mussolini? I'm going to Google that now. Hold on. His name's Mussolini, but that's really going to bother me. So anyways, Mussolini is going to take over, and he's going to... Benito. Wow, that wasn't even close. Ugh. So he's going to take over Italy, and he's going to overthrow the power there. Adolf Hitler is going to take over Germany, and they're going to have the Nazi regime will be established. And as they take over, they are going to be centralizing their governments. They're going to be having authoritarian structures. In Germany, they're going to be based on militaristic, racial, anti-Semitic, and nationalist policies. That's where you see things like the Nuremberg laws that are going to be established. Japan also, in 1868, they're going to be undertaking political and economic cultural reforms. They're going to be having a unified and central state known as the Empire of Japan, aka Imperial Japan, and this is going to be a 77-year period that's going to last until 1945. And they're going to be taking imperial control of Korea and Taiwan. So you see these three, Italy counts, large movements of countries happening during this time frame, and very authoritarian leaders taking control. Sorry, I can do it. Another Dr. Seuss cartoon, we see America First, that is connected via the beard with this Nazi fellow, as we can tell by the swastika on his vest. Okay, the Neutrality Act of 1935. So this is going to give the president, FDR, power to prohibit United States ships from carrying U.S.-made arms to countries at war. U.S. citizens traveling on ships belonging to countries at war do so at their own risk. So pretty much like, hey guys, we're really not getting involved. We're not pulling a World War I here where we want to trade with you and make money off of you. Like, we don't want any of this, is how we start off this whole idea that, like, you do you. And this is going to start to change a little bit as we move forward, which brings us then to the Popular Front. So the Popular Front is going to be our American intellectuals and social activists that are actually going to want the U.S. to get involved in the war against fascist governments. I know that, like, usually that segment of the population tends to be anti-war, but they are going to want to get involved because they see Adolf Hitler is a fascist dictator, and they see, the ethnic cleansing beginning. Now, the Holocaust hasn't officially begun at this point as the genocide in the systematic concentration camps, but definitely the Nuremberg laws are beginning, and anti-Semitic tensions are on the rise, and Benito Mussolini is taking over Italy, and anyways, they want to fight against it. The Communist Party membership in the United States is going to peak at 100,000 members, and many more are going to support the ideas of the party but not join. And we start to see that strife happening of the communists and wanting to support but not support the Soviet Union at this point because they are controlled by a very, very intense dictator, Joseph Stalin. But they are going to want the United States to join in the war in order to help fight fascism. And they are going to actually personally be going over into Spain. Spain's having a civil war at this point. That's why they don't get involved in World War II. And they are going to be going personally over into Spain to help fight against that fascist regime. Okay, the failure of appeasement. Appeasement, that is a big fancy word for kind of satiating your appetite, right? Like, you ever gotten home from school and you're like, oh, I'm so hungry, but if I eat dinner, if this is like your mom's like my mom. My mom would be like, don't eat too much, you gotta save room for dinner, and I'd be like, got it, but I'd be so hungry, and I'd be like, eat a little bit of this, eat a little bit of that, eat a little bit of that, and I could like never appease my appetite, right? I could never like just be full, because like what I needed was dinner, but we weren't there yet. So think of that, but on a much larger scale of Adolf Hitler and his appeasement for countries. So Germany's not supposed to be doing anything at this point, right? They're not supposed to have a military. They're not supposed to be taking over territory. They're not supposed to be doing anything like that because of the Treaty of Versailles. However, Adolf Hitler is going to be like, I can't create an empire if I don't take over territory. And he knows France and England aren't going to do anything. Sorry, I just feel so passionate about this because, like, we could have stopped World War II, man. Anyways, so Hitler's going to start by marching into the Rhineland, that territory that got taken away from them in the Treaty of Versailles. And France and England are like, you're not supposed to do that, but they don't send in troops, they don't fire, they don't do any of that. I imagine if they had fired, that would have like made Hitler go, oops, sorry, and would have maybe obeyed the Treaty of Versailles a tad more. Nonetheless, they're like, okay, fine, mostly German, you can keep it, but that's where it stops, appeasement, right? Like, we should make you a little happy so you won't want one more snack. And then Hitler goes, cool, I'm going to take the Sudetenland now. And they're like, okay, still cool, mostly German, it's fine. And he's like, cool, I'm going to annex Austria, which side of Austria was totally unsupportive. I know, like, modern day history, they're like, Austria got taken over by Hitler. No, they were like, Hitler's coming, woohoo! Anyways. Not everyone was like that. Don't get me wrong. We don't make full-on assumptions about everyone being the same within history. Common misnomer. Anyways, and then so he annexes Austria, and they're like, oh, whoa. And he's like, still mostly German. It's totally fine. then he's gonna go, all right, I took over Czechoslovakia. That's the Sudetenland. How about Poland? And then he goes to Joseph Stalin and he says, listen, we're going to sign a non-aggression pact that, like, you and I are cool. Like, I'm not going to attack you and you're not going to attack me. And in turn, we're going to split Poland. It's going to be amazing. And Joseph Stalin's like, cool. I always wanted kind of part of Poland. And I also want to be on your mostly good side to Hitler because he's like, you're crazy. But Joseph Stalin's also crazy. So September 1st, 1939, they are going to invade Poland. They're going to split it down the center. They're going to take it over. And then finally, France and England are like, oh, that's bad. That's like, we can't appease this anymore. That's like not even German. That was a country that got created from the Treaty of Versailles. You're not supposed to do that. And so then 2 days later, September 3rd, they will finally declare war on Germany. France is actually going to take not that much longer to fall to Germany. Granted, they do have a very strong resistance movement against Hitler in the underground manner. And then England's going to start getting blitzkrieged, like constant bombing soon. And I'll talk about that in like the actual war part of this. But so like they let appeasement happen and then boom, we're in full scale war by 1939. Okay, this is not a Hitler cartoon. It's a Dr. Seuss cartoon. But you, I feel like, need to see what the map looks like at this time frame. So Germany is all this like light colored stuff, right? All this light colored stuff. And they start off by taking on that like Rhineland territory that's like this area right here, and then they go over and they take over the Sudetenland that's like over in here, and then they move over and then march into Poland. We split Poland, and so Germany's gonna start taking over more and more territory, and even still, you're gonna see that much of Europe is either taken over or friends with Germany at this point by 1940. You're going to have, there are some countries that are going to remain neutral. Technically, the Soviet Union has that non-aggression pact with Germany at this point. Switzerland has everyone's money. Spain's in civil war. Yugoslavia is pretty much controlled by Russia. And so really, the only person standing against poor Great Britain, the only one standing up against Germany at this point in 1940. Okay. So that brings us to the Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies. Wow, that is such a long name. Yes, it is. Actually. So these are the people who are like, war. We need to go to war. Hitler is evil. Mussolini is evil. Japan is evil. They're like, we got to fight. We have to fight. Like, this is where you got to stand up against like actual evil here, people. So they're going to be pro-England. They're going to have a really strong campaign. Like, we got to go to war. We got to have propaganda out there. And they're going to urge us to go fight and help aid England, because they're like, Britain is fighting our fight. Like, if they take over Great Britain, who's literally the only country standing against Hitler right now, where does it leave us? That our only ally has fallen. What are we supposed to do? And so they're like, doom and gloom. And then we have the America First, right? This right here is the cartoon about that. And this is the Appeaser, which is also meant to represent Charles Lindbergh. And you're saying, wow, Mrs. Bell, you mean Charles Lindbergh, like the guy who flew across the Atlantic in an airplane and made it to France, and like that was cool and he was a national hero? Yeah, I mean that same guy. He was so anti-war. So he's going to vigorously oppose the war. He says isolationism, as well as everyone else in the America First campaign, is going to say isolationism is the only way. They say Europe has their own problems. Let them deal with them. We are not to be involved. It's never led to good things. Let's ignore them. And that then leads us into Franklin Delano Roosevelt's speech. And he's going to give this speech in 1941. It's his State of Union address. And at the very end, he's going to give this kind of conclusive message of what he feels about the nation this time. I mean, 1941, Europe is megasonic at war at this time. Britain's being bombed constantly. Things are not looking good. And this speech is going to be called The Four Freedoms, because at the very end, he's going to say, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. He says these are things that, you know, we as Americans want to secure not only for ourselves, but everywhere. He's like, it is our duty as Americans to make sure that people have these freedoms throughout the world, that they have their freedoms where they live, that we should be helping, you know, Britain be able to have those freedoms, that we should be helping people in the Nazi Germany territory be able to have these freedoms, because they don't. And just kind of this mentality that we're powerful and we can fight this, like we can do this. Like, it's kind of like a pep talk before we actually know we're going to go play the game. He's like, guys, this is important. This is what we find important. So let's fight for it. So again, just to remind you, it is the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. So then that's going to lead us into the Lend-Lease Act. What an act. So March 11th, 1941, Congress is going to pass the Lend-Lease Act. And this is going to give, as a law, it's going to give power to Franklin Delano Roosevelt to sell, transfer, exchange, and lend equipment to any country that needs help to defend itself against the Axis powers. So like, we're just gonna lend you like these tanks and these machine guns and like just help you out if you need it. Like, we're here, but we're not fighting, right? We're not a part of this. We're not taking weapons there. We aren't like selling them. We're just like leasing them or lending them. So it's not a big deal. So this is like us like getting involved without getting involved. And then that leads us to December 7th, 1941. So there have been a couple events that had happened before this. Japan had invaded China. And when I say invaded China, I mean it was brutal. The Japanese were really brutal in their campaign in Asia. Obviously, they were very brutal so with our soldiers and the like. But they were, I mean, Nanjing, the one city that they go through, is called the Rape of Nanjing, because they're not even sure how many people were actually massacred. The estimates go anywhere from like 10,000 people to like 500,000. So they're not entirely sure because the numbers weren't entirely accurate, but they rape thousands of women and they just burn the city and just atrocities all around. And FDR is like, Japan, no. And so Japan's like, yeah, we're doing what we want to do. And so Japan's pursuing what they call the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. And they want to control from Korea to Indonesia. And so in response, we freeze their assets. And we also start an embargo. And part of that embargo is the oil embargo. Because who does Japan get all their oil from? Us. And so we're trying to hurt the Japanese war machine. So then in response, General Tojo, who is the military leader of Japan at this time, is going to start creating plans to attack Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is our naval fleet harbor in Hawaii, and it is also the closest response system we have to the Philippines. Darn it, I wish I had put a map here. Instead of the Dark Just Juice cartoon. Darn it. So in the Philippines, wait, I have a globe. This is the Soviet Union era globe, but that's irrelevant. Okay, so Hawaii is here, right? And the Philippines are over here, right? And so they're over here. You can't see this. Japan wants the Philippines because they feel like that's a very good feeling point then for them to go fight elsewhere. And so they are going to be wanting to take the Philippines. But who owns and occupies the Philippines as a national world power that even the Philippines is their own people? Still us. And so they say, hey, this is twofold. We attack Pearl Harbor, we attack the United States' ability to respond with their naval fleet to the Philippines, and then we are also going to attack the Philippines because that would be totally surprised, unsuspecting, and then they won't be able to fight it off. So Pearl Harbor is going to be attacked December 7th, 1941. More than 2,400 Americans are going to be killed in action at Pearl Harbor. And declaration of war against Japan is going to be brought the day after that. That's where FDR is going to give his very famous speech of the day that will live in infamy. It's a really powerful speech. I'll find that on YouTube and link it up as well to your homework. And shortly after that, then, Germany and Italy are going to declare war against the United States because we declared war on Japan. After the Japanese, that is, are going to attack the Pearl Harbor naval base, they are going to attack the Philippines, and that attack is going to last a couple of weeks, and then our General MacArthur is going to be pulled out of the Philippines because they realize it's like, we're going to lose, it's not going well, and so they pull our general out, and shortly thereafter the Philippines are going to fall, and the Bataan Death March is going to occur, and we're really going to see the brutality of the Japanese soldiers, and how hard this war is going to be to fight and win. But you're going to see after Pearl Harbor that the United States is going to feel more of a reason to get involved with the war. Okay, so financing the war, just like World War I, wars are not cheap and we got things to do, right? So they are going to mobilize the economy for the war effort. So they're going to tax personal income. Businesses are going to pay for half the war. The income tax and the business tax are going to pay for half the war. They're going to borrow money from the citizens and the wealthy through those bonds. And a number of civilians are going to be working for the government during this time frame. You're going to see also the War Production Board, just like World War I, where they're going to be allocating resources so that you have only so much, oil or rubber or sugar or whatever you get to use, and that different businesses are going to be told what to create for the war effort in order to help. That's what you see Ford making like tanks during this time. Mobilizing the American fighting force. So more than 15 million men and women are going to enlist in the armed forces because this is a really impassioned war that we were attacked, and fighting against fascism, it just feels like, yes, we're fighting against real evil here. So millions of civilians are also going to be mobilized in their workplaces. You're going to see there's going to be a civilian corps of people that kind of practice drills within their towns, enforce certain, like, lights out at certain times in order to help conserve oil and electricity and things like that to help the war effort. You're going to see more than 1 million African Americans are going to be fighting as well. They're going to be fighting in segregated units though. The NAACP is going to really kind of be about the message of a Jim Crow army cannot fight a free world. That, like, why are we fighting this war if we're not going to be a part of it? But they're going to be focusing also on the Double V campaign, victory abroad and victory at home for desegregation. You're going to see Native and Mexican Americans are not going to be segregated when they're fighting, and Native Americans are actually going to be a huge force within our codes. The Cherokee, but now I question myself. Code talkers during World War II, they are going to be using their native language in the codes, and it's unbreakable the entire war. About 350,000 women are going to enlist, and they're going to be serving in the Women's Army Corps, so serving as nurses and the like. 100,000 are going to be accepted for voluntary emergency service. Then we nurses, pilots. They're going to have limited duties because they can't command men. That's part of the thing at the time, and they're also barred from combat duty. Okay, Rosie the Riveter. That is, you've ever seen a poster in the back of my classroom? The lady's going like this. Oh, look at my muscle. Look at that. I'm kidding. Anyways, so Rosie the Riveter, she is going to be representing this new female role of World War II. World War I, it was kind of there, but it really starts to take place in World War II, that all these men are going off to fight, and we need to really ramp up our industrial production during this time frame. And who's here to do all the job? Women. And so Riveter she was like riveting on ships, riveting on the ships. And so she's representing kind of this female empowerment, like, hey, you can also do the job of men. We can do it, right? So women are going to be working in defense industries. They're going to be leaving their roles as housewives, and they're going to be working kind of leaving those lower paying jobs for more lucrative money in the defense industry. They're going to be working as riveters, as shipbuilders, as drill press operators, and so many other things. By 1945, women made up 36% of the labor force. Woohoo! They're still going to be facing sexual harassment and wage discrimination, but some child care will be provided by the government for them at their jobs. However, when the war ends, women are going to be expected to give up their jobs that they had, gone out and fulfilled these jobs that men had filled in the first place, and were able to, make do and make things happen. But they're going to be expected to kind of move back to where they had started, and that's where you kind of see that pushback happen in the 1950s, and then towards the end of the 1950s into 1960s, the women's movement will take place. But 1940s is kind of that seed, right? That seed of discontent of like, what we had so long ago, that will start to become different later. Okay. Japanese removal, the very last thing I have to talk to you about. So there is going to be a large anti-Asian sentiment within the nation after Pearl Harbor, because after an attack happens on a nation, people tend to get more nativist and ethnically tense towards that particular group. So that is going to happen after Pearl Harbor, and that's going to be directed at Japanese Americans. Japanese Americans are largely on the West Coast. Geographically, if you think about that, that's because that is the coast that is closest to Japan. So when they immigrated, that was closer to where they were. So there are fears that there's going to be more attacks happening, and that people who are Asian Americans are going to want to pick up arms, or going to be spies, or they are going to be sending home information or whatever. And there's also this fear of, protecting the Japanese Americans as well. Now, mind you, some of these are people that have been living in America for decades, that they are like second, third, fourth generation Americans and have no idea about anything in Japan. So the Executive Order 9066 is going to be issued by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the War Department then is going to have the authority to force the Japanese and Japanese Americans into relocation camps. For the rest of the war, these relocation camps are going to be further inland, like Arizona, New Mexico, places like that. And generally, they're going to be forced to live behind barbed wire on very remote locations that are going to be guarded, aren't going to be the same as their homes. Some people are going to be living like in horse barns and military-style barracks, and it's not the same kind of freedoms that they would have normally. So there is going to be a Japanese American that is going to be opposed to this, Korematsu, and Fred Korematsu, and he's going to sue. He's going to say, like, I'm not doing this. I'm not going there. I don't want to. I'm an American. Like, I have rights as an American citizen. And so this actually makes it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And at the Supreme Court, they're going to rule, like, it's an executive order. You have to follow it. It just is what it is. But there are going to be dissenting opinions against the ruling of Korematsu. And the main one of the dissenting opinions pretty much like, why are we just doing this to Japanese Americans? Like, we should be doing this to the Italian and German Americans too. If this is for the safety of our nation and the safety for them, don't you think we would be doing this for everyone that we're fighting in World War II? And pretty much like, this is a load of malarkey. And after he's going to ultimately lose, Korematsu, that is, ultimately going to lose his court case and will be placed in jail. So many years after the war had ended, Congress is going to award $20,000 to survivors along with a public apology about Japanese internment. Japanese internment tends to be a lesser known portion of American history because, trust me, I love the United States and I feel like I'm very lucky to live here versus some other nations in the world, especially being a woman. But we sometimes tend to gloss over things that aren't nearly as pretty or as happy, or like, in modern standpoints, don't look nearly as nice. And Japanese internment tends to be one of those things that is lesser known about and less talked about within history. But you have to look at the full picture in order to kind of know your history and where you came from and what our nation has been built upon. And in order to move forward, you can't really know yourself till you know the whole picture, right? So that is the start of World War II, both in Europe and why we get involved. And then the home front response. We are going to be looking at, not in class, but with your next homework, going to be looking at the main events of World War II. We're not going battle by battle. So if you're like, talk to me about D-Day, we're skimming. And we're really going to be focusing on that end of World War II and the dropping of the atomic bombs. Okay, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to sign up for Key Time. Come to before or after school, or submit your question to the question box in the back of the room on the back table, or post it at Edmodo, whichever you prefer. I hope you enjoyed this super spectacular, fantastic lecture, because World War II is like one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I hope that came across.